So thank you, Jeff. Thank you for the introduction. And I'm going to be going back and forth with my glasses. I'm at that age where I'm struggling between getting the glasses that will allow me to see you guys and see what's directly in front of me. So as Jeff said, I'll be dealing with the public policy side of some of these issues. I just want to give a real heartfelt thanks to Jeff and to Ziva and to Tim and to Darren and to Howard and a lot of these, and Chris, and a lot of these guys who have just done such a great job of pulling this effort together. It's really extraordinary that we're sitting here in May of 2019, literally a year and a half after legalization hit California, and this group is really bringing the thought process so far along, so much faster than it would otherwise. The reason I say this is I'm spending a lot of time across the state and a little bit of time in other places around the country dealing with the issues that we're struggling with here in California. And as a lot of people say, as California goes, so goes the country. And I think that that's actually true, and I'm going to address that a little bit with some of the things that I'm going to talk about. But what is of concern to me is when I'm in the small to mid-sized towns in California and they're not thinking about important issues. They're not thinking about important science. They're not thinking about important policy issues. And they're certainly not getting baked into local policy. They're not getting baked into what's happening with tax revenue. Is that going to go towards research that's important to the community of San Luis Obispo or Santa Barbara or Atascadero or wherever these towns are? So we have this sort of global thing happening. We have global legalization happening, and it's awesome. And I don't mean that in like, awesome, yeah, bro, this is awesome. It's awesomely, incredibly powerful, and it's moving so fast. And there's so many dollar signs and so many people so excited about this thing that it's moving at breakneck speed. And for me, it's a little bit frustrating to be on calls with lobbyists, in meetings with legislators, and they're just scrambling to try and make sense of this thing. And there's already a great deal of industry capture. So we have associations, we have powerful companies that are just getting their start in, certainly up in Sacramento, a little bit in Washington, D.C. The big game, obviously, to this point has been at the states, but we're already seeing, as I'll point out in some of the legislation I'm going to talk about, that the game is moving along quite quickly at the federal level, and maybe even more quickly than we even anticipated. I'm surprised we got here as fast as we did, and there are estimates that we could flip this thing national in 2 years. Maybe it'll be 10 years, and obviously the devil's in the details. So there are people in this room who have got a handle on science, who've got a handle on medicine. I can at best sort of stick around on the layman's side of that argument. But what I think is important to know is that we have hundreds of thousands and millions of consumers who are waiting for you guys to figure this thing out, to do the research, to get the information out in a meaningful way, and to communicate it in a way that consumers, that manufacturers can understand and translate into the products that they make, that the labeling, the testing that they do for their products, and what's ultimately going to be sitting on that counter at the retail shop when someone goes in to buy their edible, or they go in to buy their infused drink, or to get a pack of pre-rolls or whatever it is that they're going to end up consuming. We want to have at least as much of an idea about what's in that product. The consumer wants to have as much idea of what's in that product as we do when we go to buy a box of Cheerios. All right. So some notable headlines and excerpts from the first year and a half of legalization. January 22nd, 2018, LA Times talked about the first state licensed adult use cannabis dispensaries are now open in the city of Los Angeles. And actually, it's interesting to note that the city of Sacramento had more licensed retail locations ready to go at the time of legalization than any other city, because they grandfathered a lot of their medical operations that have been around for 10 years. So 10 years before that, a bunch of licensees sort of hopped in and took advantage of the fact that they said, we're not gonna regulate you, we're not gonna give you a hard time. So they jumped in, and these were the first retail outlets that were operating in Sacramento. Another big headline from last year, after legalization, Dr. Dre's weed man is thriving. Talking about Virgil Grant of Los Angeles, who is now actually running a successful manufacturing and retail operation. I only half mean to be silly about this. Virgil Grant was providing weed for a lot of the people in the music industry here in LA and was very famous. And the fact that we now have an industry that's embracing him and allowing him to create a label and to be a champion for social equity is really a sociological phenomenon. It's extraordinary that he has a place in this industry in a way where we're working hard to make sure that he succeeds. Last year also, Attorney General Jeff Sessions' tough stance on legalized marijuana could lead to federal closure of some facilities in states where it's legal. This was an interview with Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper. He predicted that. Of course, Jeff Sessions is not around anymore. 2 months after that headline, we saw another one that says, Trump administration abandons crackdown on legal marijuana. So it was very quick. Senator Gardner and Elizabeth Warren and Earl Blumenauer and several other members of our Congress and of the House and of the Senate are putting together something called the States Act. And that basically says simply if you're operating in conformance with your state laws, what you're doing is legal under federal law. That's a quote from Earl Blumenauer. So I think what we're looking at and what's important to the people in this room is that mandate that I was calling out for before, research. Are we going to be able to get quality marijuana products in the lab? Can we actually look at the materials that people are consuming in real life, not just the marijuana that we're getting out of Mississippi, which doesn't give us the chance to do some of the things that we want to do. And again, this is to create products that are going to bring benefit to a lot of people, whether that's just the enjoyment of euphoria, or whether that's real pain relief, or whether that's dealing with seizure disorders, or some of the conditions that a lot of you are committing a lot of energy to. Part of legalization has been a disappointment. And I would say, a lot of people would say it's been a disappointment. Partially that's because expectations were set so high. And some of that was, hey, it's January of 2018 and we're legal. Shouldn't I be able to just walk into a shop and pick up some marijuana, right? The reality is that only about a quarter of the cities in the state of California have started to license storefront retail. Maybe 40% of the cities in California have licensed any kind of cannabis business. So you still have a lot of cities, and we're talking about cities that voted 55, 60% in favor of legalization, who said, not in my backyard. We're not going to do it here. And the city councils that are standing behind them. Some of the most extraordinary stories are places like Calaveras County, where they initially encouraged a lot of people to come on up and open up cultivation facilities. And the city got cold feet. I mean, this was issues with their, the county supervisors got cold feet. And there was a switch around on their opinion. And after a bunch of people came up and spent money, literally their life savings, to start a farm up there, they found themselves sitting on land that was worthless because it was now illegal to do business in Calaveras County. They have now again switched back to legalizing, to licensing, and they're going to actually try to make some reparations to some of the people who lost a lot of money. So let's talk about tax revenue. So for the state, Governor Gavin Newsom's proposed budget forecast $355 million and $514 million in excise tax revenues for fiscal year 2019 and 2020, respectively. The revised budget released last week reduced those projections to $288 million in 2019 and $359 million in 2020. So we're seeing that even the numbers that we started out with, in the beginning, there were estimates of $1 billion, almost $1 billion of revenue for the state of California, and we're coming in quite short of that. And a big part of that challenge is because of local control. Not every state in the country is licensing the way we are, But there is a lot of power in the city halls and with county governments in the state of California. It's very frustrating for a lot of people who are in the industry, and they will not be shy in telling you. It's a struggle to get these licenses, and it's a struggle for the cities to move quickly on licensing. It is challenging to set up a licensing regime for anything, much less doing it for cannabis. So there's the whole process, and I'm just going to walk you through this, and this is sort of my day-to-day thing. 101 information for the community about what does legalization look like. Working with the city council to try and draft up an ordinance on what legalization might look like. Getting feedback from the community. Going back to the city council so that the city council can express the values of the community in that ordinance. Then putting it out an RFP, trying to attract new businesses to come into your city, the right kind of businesses that are going to be well-funded and compliant. And sometimes that doesn't mean the local guy who's been running the pot shop on the corner for the last 5 years. You'd like that guy to succeed, and you want him, you champion him. And in some cases, that championing effort manifests itself in merit criteria that a lot of cities use to try and help sort of give points to the guy who's been around and working with the community. That can create some challenges for outside businesses that want to come in and want to be participating on an even playing field. So we do things sort of trying, sometimes these businesses will try to match up with local operators. And then there's social equity concerns. So I'm just going to speak about social equity for a second. We're working really hard to try and get that going here in Los Angeles. Oakland's got a pretty nice program going. Some of the larger cities in California are really doing an earnest job at trying to, I would say, honor what was a major part of the movement, which was to try to take what people were getting arrested for and move this into a legal industry and to create opportunities for people who are disproportionately impacted in the war on drugs. That manifests itself in many different ways. As it turns out, it's a very difficult thing to do. So when you're trying to create a social equity licensing environment for these communities, you're basically trying to protect a business class from over competition. You want to see them succeed. And so that's gonna come from preparing the playing field in a way that you can help them work through taxes, CPAs, attorneys, all of these things that are very expensive. Help out with space, help out with security. Try and do a lot of these things to encourage these businesses to come in and stay in business. Well, it's timely, it's expensive, it can be a little bit cumbersome for some of these communities. Is it the right thing to do? Yes. Are there other ways that we can exhibit social equity in our communities besides helping out a small handful of license holders? Yes, absolutely. Should we do it for these license holders? Probably. But money can also be diverted to go into programs that are helpful for us as far as understanding development of the adolescent brain, cannabis use disorder, trying to help with prevention programs in the community, education programs. Money can go towards scholarships or other things like that to benefit the community. So when you start to unpack some of these things, you realize that when we start to protect businesses, we also have to have the resources to protect those businesses. And that ends up coming in the form of higher regulations and higher taxes, which then make it harder for the small guy to get into business and to license. So the economics of it can be a little tricky. So the next piece that has been a big challenge for businesses in California and elsewhere is dealing with putting unlicensed operators out of business. Now, if you're an unlicensed operator, this is obviously not your priority, but that actually explains the people who are producing 80% of the flower that's being grown in the state of California right now does not end up back in the licit licensed market. So 80% is either going into the back door of licensed operations, going straight into unlicensed operations in California, or it's ending up in trucks or in van loads headed out to Chicago, New York, Phoenix, wherever. So there are a lot of people who are still making a decent amount in the illicit market, and the prospect of entering the licensed market is a huge challenge. Because if you want to come in, you have to go through the merit criteria, you have to go through the licensing process, you have to pay the upfront fees, you got to pay the renewal fees, you have to be inspected, you have to be compliant. So this creates a lot of challenges for our different businesses trying to get in and make it in the state of California and elsewhere. So some of the public health concerns that have come across in the last year and a half, a couple that are worth addressing. This was a headline out of Vermont. With this box of chocolates, hotel workers didn't know they were getting pot edibles. The box that a guest at a 4-star Inn left behind was labeled salted caramel chocolates. The candies were actually marijuana edibles, potent enough to leave a Shelbourne Farms employee so ill that she was found lying in the inn's driveway. So, not a great outcome, right? And of course, we can't control everything that happens out there. We can do our best. We have a lot of regulations here in the state about child-proof packaging. And that's basically on everything that you would take out of a dispensary. But once these products get home and someone's tried to sort of rip the packaging apart or figure out how to get into these things that are usually, I think, a little bit more difficult than most adults can figure out, where does that end up? Is it accessible to children? Do you have somewhere safe to keep it in your house? These are questions that, again, are all part of robust information campaigns, so we can try and get people to be more responsible about the products that they're keeping in their house. And again, the big win here is if we can do this safely, if we don't have stories like this coming out of Vermont, then people get the products that they want and they need in some cases. Okay, so, and that's also manifested here in California. More California kids are having pot-related health scares. Poison control officials have said the number of calls to poison control centers, this is from July of 2018. The number of calls to poison control centers involving people 19 and younger who were exposed to marijuana has steadily risen from 347 3 years ago to 588 last year. So we're seeing a jump. Okay, some people say, oh, that's really bad. To me, I was really happy to hear that because I think it was happening anyway and people weren't calling. People didn't want to get arrested. And so now, if a first responder comes to you, if you're having a panic attack or an anxiety attack from overdosing on maybe an edible that hit you too hard or something like that, the first responders will come, the paramedics will come. They'll address the concern. It's filed as an overdose, so the police usually have to show up just to make sure that nothing criminal happened. But they will not treat that as a criminal matter. They'll simply just check and make sure you're okay, nothing fishy happened, great, sounds good, have a wonderful day. That's a big change from where we were even 2 to 5 years ago, and I would say that's probably a pretty great result. And we don't want to have this dystopian vision of legalization either. At the end of the day, 5-10 years down the road, we're going to look at cannabis licensing on the cultivation side like other stinky crops, like mushrooms and onions, maybe, right? I mean, it's psychoactive, so we have to be protective of it. You need different security measures, but the nuisance issues of smell and some other things, some of these things will become normalized. On the manufacturing side, really we'll be looking more at, the exciting thing is when the shift happens from DEA to FDA, we'll actually be able to monitor some of these manufacturing processes in a way that is normalized as well. And so we'll be looking at manufacturing more analogous to, say, alcohol or even food products that are manufactured out there. And retail, we'll be looking at sort of the analogy to liquor stores. And we'll see where cannabis is made available. I know that Walgreens and CVS are already making quite a play into the market to try and get involved. The other one that's sort of interesting, and I was with a city official from West Hollywood last night, and we were talking about on-site consumption. So they have already issued a series of licenses, and in some cases they're looking to sort of bring along this James Beard culinary experience with infused cannabis dishes. So it'll be really interesting to see what's coming out of the kitchen. Are they going to put a little ramekin of THC-infused oil for your salad? Are you going to have sort of a controlled portion of spaghetti sauce that you can put on your pasta? These are all questions they're going to have to figure out. Do they have to specially mark the plates that says 30 milligrams on this plate? Maybe. I will say, having struggled as a bartender and a waiter for my first 6 years of working life after the age of 16, I occasionally made mistakes on what I brought out to a table. Hate to admit it. The outcome of that, when there's 50 milligrams of THC in a plate, that's not a great outcome. So they're going to have to figure out quality control, what's coming out of the kitchen, who's getting what, and what are they going to do if someone does have a bad experience? You can't serve alcohol in these locations, so that's a good thing, because the combination of the two can be a little tricky. But what happens if you have someone who didn't react so well to the spaghetti? I don't know. We'll see. Okay, so new states, and Jeff, can you give me an idea on when I should sort of open it up to questions? How am I doing on time?
You've gone about 20 minutes in.
Okay, all right, and I have 45.
So maybe go another 10.
Okay, all right, cool, awesome.
I think there's probably a lot of discussion.
Okay, great, awesome. All right, I just want to bring up some new states that are likely to go legal beyond the 11 that are fully adult legal and the 30 some odd medical states that we have out there right now. So Hawaii, Ohio, New Mexico, Minnesota, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Vermont, even Wisconsin may go the route of adult use within the next couple of years. Does anyone here know how prohibition of alcohol was overturned? Anyone shout that out? How many states do you need to overturn? Right, so 37 states said nay, and that we may be headed in that direction as well if Congress doesn't get around to taking care of that. I don't know where your political allegiances lie, but there is some talk of Trump sort of grabbing the cannabis legalization issue and becoming the legalization president, who is going to be the one to push maybe even the States Act bill forward and try to encourage a Republican Congress to embrace it. So we'll see how that goes. That stranger things have happened in the world. So the industry has become quite mainstream very quickly, and of course we're going to have to be federally legal before the big banks and a lot of big pharma and a lot of the big companies are going to truly embrace it in the way they have up in Canada with national legalization up there. But you've already got interest, PricewaterhouseCoopers, McKinsey, Ernst & Young. A lot of these companies are doing some consulting on these businesses. A lot of the big law firms. We're even getting some of the banks that are jumping into this space. A good portion of the businesses that are operating in the state of California anyway are working through banks, and it's basically a don't ask, don't tell mechanism. You walk in and talk about this, your financial needs and needing to write checks for your herbal business, whatever you're using. There are some banks that are hitting this straight on and actually jumping into the foray. We have some state legislation on the way to try and create a state bank. It's unlikely that it's actually going to get done. Most of the feasibility studies have said that that's unlikely to be able to get that done too quickly. I would predict that more likely we'll head the federal route and probably have banking and research sort of clarity coming on within the next 5 to 10 years. I know that seems like a really, really long time, But just getting anything done at the FDA, I don't know if any of you guys have been following the deeming process for tobacco and vaping and all that kind of stuff. I mean, these things just take years and years and years. So we will hopefully get there at some point. And also, it's interesting to look at the industry players who are there right now. You have Kiva Chocolates, which is one of the larger manufacturing companies. They don't even manufacture their own extracts. They purchase it from a third party. They are licensing their manufacturing process in several other states across the country. So, and then you have big players on the dispensary, on the retail front, like MedMen, massive amounts of capital behind them, aggressive teams getting in to take care of licensing in all these different cities. So it's probably not exactly what the leaders of the movement were picturing in the 70s and the 80s and through the 90s. This is big boy and girl business. This is something that will, and I hate to use the phrase, but probably more likely resemble big tobacco or big alcohol and big ag. And that brings me to my next point, which is if we want to see innovation, if we want to protect small business people, if we want to provide social equity in our communities, we've got to figure out what is the license type, what is the arrangement we can use to allow that individual to thrive. And I'm going to tell you with cultivation, manufacturing, and some of the larger scalable operations where your competition is regional, statewide, and when when federal restrictions drop, your competition is going to be national and perhaps even international. By the way, a pound of flour in the state of Washington has dropped below $200 for a pound. And our tax of $9 and something odd cents an ounce adds up to about 100% taxation on flour at those prices. So we'll see where that goes. But my point is that there may be opportunities for us to create opportunity zones or places for social equity applicants and participants to compete on the retail level, because then you're only competing with a range of a few miles, and you've got people who are going to come in, and obviously there's the statewide delivery thing and the Amazonization of delivery, and we'll see what happens. I mean, really, a company with a couple $1 billion could come in and just open 80 fulfillment centers and just deliver to the entire state. And maybe that will be Amazon. I don't know. We'll see. Maybe you'll have a drone dropping some edibles on your front porch very soon. But I think we can create some opportunities for small business people to get in and compete and work with communities to try to use social equity as a brand, as analogous to fair trade coffee, where if you buy cannabis grown and manufactured, packaged, tested, retailed in Oakland or other communities, you know that this was done through a social equity lens and a different program, and maybe people will be willing to pay a premium for that. I don't know. We'll see. So those are some of the considerations. I do have some other things that I wanted to cover, but I would actually rather hear your questions, and I can always pipe in and add some more if you guys would like. But I think we've got probably 10, 15 minutes.
Yeah, 8 minutes.
Or 8 minutes. So does anyone have any questions on what I brought up or anything else that I might be able to help out with? Yeah.
What is your sense of the city regulators' understanding of how the taxation in this state has affected the huge growth of the black market, which was their intent to close down by regulating in the first place?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm glad you brought that up. Very little sense of it. There's an assembly bill right now Bonta, I believe, is sponsoring, trying to cut down our 15% state tax to 11 and to eliminate that cultivation tax I was talking about. But yeah, you have cities talking about tax rates of upwards of 10, 12 plus percentage points. It's unrealistic for us to think that our consumers are going to move over to the licensed market, or at least our heavy users, which drive the market, are going to come over to the licensed and regulated market with tax rates as high as they are. The effective tax rate for a consumer in some of these cities where the costs are higher can be upwards of 50%. And for the businesses themselves, it's way higher because they can't write any of this stuff off except for cost of goods sold. So and we have another assembly bill trying to fix that, at least in California. But there's just way too much that makes it difficult to operate in this space and makes it too difficult for people who are consuming a high amount to actually leave their dealer. And we've seen some really good research that's saying, there are a lot of people who say, I'm sticking with my guy. I've been with him for a long time, and I'm going to continue to buy from him. I trust him. You guys can do all this packaging, labeling, testing stuff. It's great, but it's not worth it for me to pay double that, what I have been paying. So it's a great point, and we're going to have to sort of figure that out. We'll muddle through it, but yeah, illicit market is massive.
Hi. Could you discuss if there's any movement at the federal level for descheduling, and specifically if that's a legislative or administrative process?
So I haven't seen a lot of focus on that, and maybe there are some other people who've been tracking federal legislation better on this, but most of the focus has been on actually trying, with the States Act bill, Cory Booker's got a bill. There are a couple other of them that are trying to create tax allocations to help small businesses, to help equity functions, to help some of the communities that have been disproportionately affected on the war on drugs. That's a great question, and I think that I hope that we can get to addressing it, but I haven't seen any real action on that. And to be honest with you, I don't know why. I don't know why it hasn't been more of a priority. If anyone else has any insights on that specific issue, I'd be happy to hear it. Thank you.
The Shea legislation specifically prohibits any dietary supplement or herbal product to be used to prevent, cure, treat, or mitigate disease. So because you have an approved drug through FDA, that now prohibits descheduling, and they're likely not to deschedule it because there's an approved drug. So paragraph C of the Shea law says if something's previously been approved as a drug, it can't be a dietary supplement.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think some of this is the tail wagging the dog, or what comes first, the apple, the cart, or the horse. The problem is there's it's proven safe and effective. It's that language that we have to get to, and we'll get to that language when we can properly research these products. And so you move out of Schedule 1 if you have something that has proven medical use. So yeah.
And maybe actually to add a point, to clarify.
Please.
To clarify what Dr. Herber was saying, is that I think you're referring to specifically to things like Epidiolex and right. So when you have naturally occurring compounds, there is kind of a who got there first scenario. So if you have a situation where the naturally occurring compound was widely quote unquote sold or marketed, and then a pharma company comes along and creates an FDA-approved drug out of that compound, both are allowed to coexist. Okay, so it's kind of, the supplement industry already started selling it, pharma came along, got an FDA-approved version, both are allowed to coexist and be sold. But if you have a scenario where there's a naturally occurring compound, which can't technically be patented or owned in and of itself because it's naturally occurring, but if you have a situation where the pharma company goes and creates a drug out of it before it is widely marketed and sold, that pharma company has complete exclusivity over that compound. It cannot be sold as a supplement, as a dietary ingredient. It cannot be sold outside of an FDA-approved pharmaceutical framework. And that is, if you guys Google anything that the FDA has said about CBD, that's what has happened. Is that Epidiolex, this drug that was FDA-approved recently, has kind of excluded the sale of CBD as a dietary ingredient, natural supplement, et cetera. It sounds like what you're also suggesting is that we might never see uh, cannabis or these other compounds, or cannabis as a plant material, descheduled, because you could always just keep cannabis as Schedule 1 and then have these medicines be lower on the schedule or unscheduled entirely. And that kind of, I believe that's what you were suggesting.
If you have an extract, even if it's safe and effective, if it contains something that previously was approved as a drug, and I have unfortunately personal experience with this with Chinese red yeast rice, which is legal in every country in the world except the United States, because it naturally contains 6 congeners of Mevacor, which was a multi-billion-dollar Merck statin drug, now off patent, and because it contained that, Chinese red yeast rice is not legal in the United States, and anyone who sells more than 2 milligrams, it gets seized. So the Chinese red yeast rice you see at Costco basically has phytosterol in it and a trace of Chinese red yeast rice. So that the drug industry pretty much controls the FDA, and that's protecting the drug industry and their future ability to make purified compounds as opposed to mixed compounds. Now, recreational marijuana depends what you say about it. If it's just a smoke or it's just a food, you're not making a health claim. That's fine. But if once you start to describe what it is, or that it does this or it does that, then you're getting into a drug claim.
I think we also need to address the high potential for abuse component as well. And, you know, there's some research that indicates that there is potential for abuse. And in some ways that we look at it, maybe even significantly more than alcohol as far as regular use during weekdays and during work periods and some other cultural things that we're going to have to figure out. And again, just it's down to the people in this room and other rooms like it to do that research so we can get a handle on questions like that. Do we have time for another question? Yeah.
It sounds like you've dealt with policymakers and regulators from a lot of different places and across the state and other states. And so have you found that regulators and policymakers tend to have the same concerns and goals no matter where you go? Or have you found that it's, depending on where you are, the policymakers really have very different outcomes that they're looking for?
That's a great question. And the answer is absolutely. Heterogeneity everywhere you go. And that's one of the wonderful things that we have with local control in California right now is we have the opportunity to research huge differences in licensing, implementation, regulation, inspections protocols, you name it. There's so many different things that impact how this product either gets made or not made, how it gets to the consumer or doesn't get to the consumer. And we have a really nice opportunity right now to collect baseline and to look at where this is all going and how those outcome measures are impacted by policymakers and regulators. So, yeah.
You know, in terms of policy making, we've kind of put the cart in front of the horse right here in California, right within research and policy. Policies come first, research comes second. Right now in the Bureau of Cannabis Control, which is our regulatory group here in California, they have an advisory board consisting of 22 people. In that advisory board, we only have 2 clinicians or 2 physicians, and the rest of the 20 individuals are all from companies, right? So when you talk about having cannabis become the next big tobacco, this is how it's going to start. How can we influence and encourage more clinicians and researchers and physicians, right? People who their money is not tied to the product. And that's the big issue, is we need to get people who are not tied to product in on policy-making decisions.
Yeah, so I'll talk about a manifestation of that. There's some real frustration from the BCC on the lack of action against unlicensed operators. And the point of that is there's a lot of industry pressuring them to deal with and it is unfair. There's someone across the street who's competing against them.
I agree.
All I wanted to bring up was that the governor on the other side was going to allocate a lot of resources towards enforcement and using criminal code rather than administrative code or helping cities use their administrative code. And he backed off of that position. So some of the frustration with BCC is that I think they're only getting 12 or 19 officers when they wanted, probably 5 times that. But to your point, I think having people from a variety of different backgrounds, including clinicians, where we're not just looking at this as a criminal justice issue or the harms of cannabis, rather what are some of the benefits, what are some of the positives and that we
And
can get out
even
of this.
in those situations, being able to say, 90% THC should not be widely available. If that's something that's going to cause schizophrenia or more hospitalizations
Precisely.
or whatever. But that's where it's becoming a problem, is that nobody's coming in on that level. Or when we say taxation is going to be given back to education, we don't talk about physician education or medical
Yeah,
school.
or even simple requirements of bud tenders to not make medical claims. Yeah, or have some standardization as to how far they can go to talk about the different products. Yeah.
Time for one more question.
Sure. I was invited from the University of Colorado to come as an observer and share with you very briefly in this question as to what has been different in Colorado that has allowed us to apparently succeed. And California seems to be bound to the past in terms of experience, in terms of our communities have, well, let me start. Denver has more pot dispensaries than it has wine and liquor stores. I am a registered, well, first of all, I'm a professor of chemistry. I've taught at the University of Colorado for the last 44 years. And so I'm 84 years old, and I remember the time that my father was a bootlegger. And that's come and gone. But just to say what's worked in Colorado that may or may not work here has been that the communities realized that we were starting with a fresher, cleaner, no, not cleaner, a fresher, more orderly system than you had already gotten started, and people weren't used to paying tax. And suddenly everyone decided, well, I'm going to make a lot of money on this. And our communities have restrained themselves because they know that it will be bootlegged if they don't restrain themselves. And the facts are simple. We've earned $250 million that we've invested in schools, construction. We've invested in driver's education for people who can't figure out whether they're too stoned to drive. And all this has been seen in a positive way. We're a purple state. You're a blue state. And we have still made it. Our governor is Governor Jared Polis, a personal friend of mine. I stood in the parking lot of the law school at the University of Colorado and told him, we researchers need protection as we do research on cannabis. Now there are 700 registered farmers. I'm a farmer. I harvested 1,000 clones last year. I provided samples of 20 different strains to my faculty colleagues under materials transfer agreements at the University of Colorado and at the Anschutz Medical Center in Aurora, Colorado. And we're making progress. We're publishing papers. I had 3 patents last year issued. So it can work. And the question is, what are the trigger points that are keeping it from working easily in your state that we've not encountered or that we've overcome? We are a medical marijuana, what's it called, Christy? We're a refugee state. We have thousands of people who come to Colorado to be treated for epileptic seizures with cannabidiol, made and grown and administered, and it's working. And Sanjay Gupta goes on national television, and more people flood in. So I'll stop, and I'll be around most of the day with my daughter, Christy, who happens to be in a different business. I don't touch THC. I don't work with marijuana at all. I'm a registered hemp farmer, one of 700, and we're being successful.
Thank you, Professor Sievers. Thank you for visiting us today. Responses, comments to that? Just another round of applause for Mr. Brad Rowe.
Thank you, Brad.